The Joining the Dots podcast focuses on the many challenges facing education and how different approaches and innovations are needed to meet those challenges.
Join co-hosts Matt Jessup and Elle Kingsley as they have discussions with innovative educators, business leaders, policymakers, and other stakeholders, and guests looking at transforming the future of education.
Looking at my screen, I've got Richard O'Neill, MB, on one side, and I've got Al Kingsley, MB, on the other side, because you were both awarded honours in this year's New Year's Honours list. So I feel a bit like I should bow, or I should be dressed smarter or something like that. But no, Richard, I don't know. I was trying to think about this, Richard, before, because every time I meet you, something else pops up, and I'm like, when did you do this sort of thing? But essentially, you are an author.
Yep.
You are a storyteller, which really doesn't scratch the surface of what you do and what you lead on in terms of education, centres, business. You are a lumberjunker, which is I know you really, and what you've done with the kids here, which we'll talk about, which is absolutely superb, one of the best things school could do. And you do lots of other stuff, but also with your background, your Romany background and your Northeast background, you sort of bring a unique perspective of what I would refer to as the soft skills, Al. So actually a lot of the stuff he does is, as we've just sort of briefly chatted about, is linked to resilience and things like that. So I don't really know what to talk about first, Richard, to be honest, but if you could tell us about the storyteller thing first.
Well, I think that's where it all started for me.
Yeah.
Because growing up in the family that I did back in the 1960s, late 60s, early 70s, and my family were pretty much nomadic, and then we were kind of semi-nomadic. So what I learned very, very early on was just how they communicated with each other so brilliantly without writing things down, because of, they really weren't able to in many cases. So when I was 4, I got obsessed with books, and I taught myself to read a book at 4. And I couldn't really read it. I guess I learned it off by heart. But when I recited it to people who couldn't read, they thought I was a bit of a genius. So that was a good start. But I learned lots of practical skills. I learned how things fitted together. I learned how to repair a chair. I learned how to carve this. I learned how to do that. And I think for me, I learned both of those things. Is what I call later on is, people might say, what's the connection then between why are you doing woodwork if you're a sort of a literacy person? Because woodwork and word work are very, very similar. What we do with Lumberjunkers is put them together. When we're creating things out of wood, if we're recycling, getting old bits and pieces and making something new, that's pretty much what we're doing when we're creating a story. There are very few new words. I think if we look back over the last 10 years, probably new words, what have we got? Selfie, that was never around. I reckon Google is a fairly new word, going back maybe 10, 15 years. But if you look at new words, there are very few that people invent. So we're always recycling old words, and we're putting them together in different ways. And that's what we're doing with woodwork. You need to have the skill, you need to have the tools, you need to have all of those things to create something that at the end of it, you can look back and go, oh, I like that. Whether that's a story that you tell, whether that's a story that's written down, whether it's a piece of art, whatever it is, you are using basic ingredients with your skill, whether cooking, whatever it is. So I think for me, storytelling, I would say, is the beating heart of all communication. So I think we wrote it off many years ago by saying, well, it's like a folk art. It's for people who weren't clever enough to be able to read and write. But actually, it's an entertainment, it's an education, it's pretty much a history. We know that when we think about, people say, well, that story about the king underneath the car park. And lots of people said, how could a king be buried under a car park in Leicester? That's never going to happen. It's just a folk tale. It's just that. And of course, then people had to kind of eat their words over that because it was true. So I think story is something that binds us together. It's something that we share. I've always said to people that we don't do PowerPoints in pubs. Nobody comes in to meet their mates in a pub and go, oh, by the way, let me tell you about my week. I'll just put it up on the screen for you. Here's all the data. I've got that in slides. And here's the pie chart about how it went. You just don't. So for me, I've always been fascinated by story and how things fit together, how society fits together, how things work. And how powerful story is, because, there are so many aspects to it. Because I think when we share a story, we actually share a little piece of ourselves. It's a heart-to-heart thing, and people have told me stories, and they've given me a bit of their life, and I respect that and carry that very, very carefully. And I think if we can get people to express themselves better in all different ways. Now, I know these days we call it oracy, but actually, it's just the offspring of story. So, we've always, I think, repackaged story for the time.
But it was interesting. Sorry, the other night, when we talked about this in the pub, I didn't realise that actually now you were getting approached by businesses and big businesses to say, look, this is our 6 pages of pie charts, data, sales forecast, whatever. We'd like you to help us repackage it into a story to present to the board, or to present to investors, present to customers and things like that. Because actually telling that story to a lot of people is as powerful a thing as actually presenting data. So you're actually doing a lot of work of storytelling, not just in education, in terms of communities and things. We actually do it now in the business sector.
Yeah, I think, more and more people are competing for other people's time. So, if you want to get your message across to somebody, if you wrap it up in a story, it's easier to accept. It's more sticky. Stories are sticky, they stick with you. And you can actually get to the point really, really well, and you can illustrate it. And one of the things I think we do with storytelling as a connector is we actually link it to other things. A really good example of this is if you look at Warburton's bread, they have a history on their website. And if they said, oh, well, Warburton's was created in 18 whatever, people go, 18 whatever, I don't know what that is, 18 whatever. But what they did really cleverly, they put, we started at the same time as the Civil War in America. Now, people immediately go, I know the Civil War. Wow, Warburton's are connected to the Civil War in America. Well, that makes sense. That'll stick. It's that kind of thing. And trying to get our children, I think, wherever they come from, whether they're from, the countryside, the city, or wherever they come from, to try and get them connected. And if you feel disconnected, it's not really good. It's not really good for your mental health. It's not really good for your ability to learn. So, I think a lot of media says to children and to adults, where you're from is not important. Look at this on the screen. It's all happening somewhere else. Whereas actually, if we can get children to believe that their stories are interesting, their stories are powerful, where they live is just as interesting and exciting as anywhere else, I think we've cracked it.
There's so many things I could unpick. It's fascinating listening to you, Richard. The first thing is I think storytelling is common across cultures and religions, and therefore there is a common unifying aspect of stories, and bringing that together and maintaining it is what binds us in whether it's stories about Liverpool winning the Premier League, or whether it's stories about our family and our grandparents and whatever. It kind of comes together. And you're right, oracy kind of is what the new more academic name that gets assigned with it. But actually, it all falls through to this common conversation we've all been having with these different episodes, which is there's a shift in terms of with the more there's a digital landscape. Our most human skills, communication being top of the list, is what's in demand. There's also an element, surely, that when you teach speaking skills, storytelling skills, develop oracy, don't you by association build confidence and agency with the child? Doesn't it give them self-confidence that they're able to articulate and engage in more conversation and be heard? And they're often the really simple things, because we're so focused on the, hey, look, all the new shiny. But you kind of feel that if we wind, as we were in our last recording, Matt, the clock forward 10 years and say, look, digital can analyze these trillions of numbers in seconds, and it can do all this research for us in minutes. The thing we'll be looking for in our organizations, whatever they may be, will be, we want human beings that people trust and can engage with and buy from. And using the Warburtons thing, people buy from people, but trust comes from history. And history, you could say, is from stories, or it could just be slick marketing. Some of the top marketing tools use the storytelling tactics as that approach to how to weave in your message. So they all come full circle in a way, don't they?
They do, and I think there's an authenticity and there's an integrity that you have to have. Otherwise, it just becomes sales patter, and that's the difference. Now, the other side to storytelling, the reason why I say we should be teaching it to children and working with children, particularly in the age of technology where we are, there are so many people out there who will tell them their story, will push a narrative to them. If you understand how storytelling works, you can unpick that narrative. And, every time somebody comes out with something, and whether you see them at a conference or you see them online and blah, 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 then with storytelling, it's kind of like an inbuilt detector. You can actually look at it and go, hang on a minute, that narrative doesn't quite hang together. There's a lot of good words in there. There's a lot of this, there's a lot of that, there's a lot of that. But there's an inauthentic message coming through. And I think that is a protection for our children. Because stories have a form, stories have a way. The old thing, if something's sounds too good to be true, it usually is.
Are you linking this to digital citizenship now in terms of validating the authenticity of information in our increasingly fake and made up echo chambers?
Yeah. And I think I've always said I think technology is great. But I would use my nomadic background to clarify that, in the sense that useful technology. Now, you have to all decide what is useful. But I think the way to decide is it useful or is it a gadget? If it's a gadget that is just clever in its own cleverness, then actually that's no use to me. I want something, when mobile phones came out first, fantastic. Wow, you can actually have a phone call. You can have a phone call where there's no fixed phone. Brilliant, wonderful. How cool is that? I remember talking to a truck driver who said, you know what is really good? I'm self-employed. I own one truck. He said, I've got the mobile phone. It's very expensive in the early days, but I can sometimes pick up a load on the way back now. So I'm actually doubling my income by having that expensive phone. Not a gadget, a brilliant tool for his business. But how many things in terms of tech do we have in school now which are gadgets rather than useful tech?
It always amuses me, Richard, when you and I chat about tech, because you are very open to it, despite what people might perceive as your background and your jobs, if you like. It's very hands-on, it's storytelling. He always reminds me of Scott Hayden, and they live in very, very different worlds, but they both come back to actually tech for the sheer hell of it is pointless. But if it's useful tech, then actually, let's engage with it. Let's teach the kids how to use it. And you think Scott is in a very different world to Richard, but actually their values in terms of technology align perfectly. And that's two people with a lot of common sense that I would, follow. And if they're Absolutely. Saying that, it's that should be the message for everyone.
I totally agree. Although I am interested. It's been in the back of my head now for about 15 minutes. I really want to know how because so far everything you've said is like, I'd like another portion of that, please, Richard, and another portion, and I'm absolutely with you. How does that translate into the storytelling, the oracy, the confidence in speaking? How does that tie into practical workshops that children are doing, maybe with woodworking and so on? How do you weave those things together to kind of reinforce? And I'm asking for those listening because I know you've been doing that work with Matt in the last week.
Yeah, definitely. Just to give you a little potted history of, I talked about my family and learning woodworking skills. I've always found woodworking skills to be really beneficial mentally and physically. You're moving your arms, you're moving your body, you're outside generally. I always say, can we do it outside? But when you're focused on doing something like that, you're not thinking about anything else. So I think there's a mental health aspect and well-being aspect to that. There is also, when I've spoken to teachers over the last since the pandemic, shall we say, and I always ask them this question now because it came up at an event. And generally, I ask them the question and I say, are children more or less resilient now than they were 10 years ago? And generally, the answer is no. They give up easier and so on and so on. And that could be, I guess, tech. It could be video games. You can just press the reset. The main learning, I think, comes from the Lumberjunkers doing outdoor woodwork is the fact that you have to put the work in. There are no shortcuts. There are carpentry tricks and tips I can give them, they might call hacks, but actually you've got a handsaw and you've got to saw it. So we've got somebody who's sawn 3 pieces. We need 4 pieces of this particular timber. They've sawn 3 pieces. Now they're on to their 4th, and they're halfway through cutting this one. And you can see they want to give up. But actually, the desire to finish the actual piece is more than wanting to give up cutting the wood. So we're talking about resilience. We're talking about tenacity. We're talking about that stick-to-itness, because the children know. And I think this is the same for everything. Whether we want children to read, whether we want them to write, whether we want them to do anything, there's always a question comes in everybody's brain. What's the point? What's the point? We have to show children the point.
I've just got to say 2 things of this, Richard. This week, from a personal perspective, Wednesday I ended up doing most Lumberjunker things today, and I was quite stressed because I'm missing emails and things. And that's a reflection on my life. But on Thursday when I was doing it, you switch off, Al. I quite enjoyed it. I made a mirror. I was dead proud of myself. Kids were laughing at me, but and you think actually for adults' mental health or anything else. But the second thing is actually for Wednesday and Thursday morning, I remember watching the kids Thursday afternoon, Richard, and you've got 6 and 7-year-olds who've been outside for 8 hours over 2 days by that point, and they are still fully focused on the task in hand. And that is absolutely amazing in this day and age. And it was only when we got sort of 2:30, 3 o'clock on the second day that a few kids started to wonder because they finished the project. But you think for kids in the day and age they're growing up in, where your attention span is seconds almost, and TikTok and all that nonsense, the kids to focus on something which, it's their thing. There's no guide. It's very much their idea. That's absolutely unique to see that nowadays.
Isn't it becoming rarer for children to get that sense of pride over achievement when we don't have the same physical steps often in their educational, their learning journey? That sense of pride and achievement comes from doing something that was really hard, that Richard alluded to. You kind of felt like you were going to quit on it and it just didn't get there. But at the end, you've got something tangible and shiny. In my case, it's an owl that looks nothing like an owl that my daughter made, that was then... she'd painted it and it's got her initials on it and it still sits on my desk and I still look at it. And it was the sense of pride that she'd finished that project. And there is something subtly different, no matter how you frame it, to the sense of solving a logarithmic equation or finishing reading a book. It's a different kind of achievement, shall we say. And I think that sense of the more we get digital, maybe, Matt, your school and your curriculum is a good example. Are we moving for the right reasons back to let's focus on the more human skills, the practical skills, the appreciation of where we live and our environment?
Just watch these 3 days and you think the curriculum in every school is absolutely crammed. You can't physically teach national curriculum. It's not possible. And if you do lots of extra stuff, then the national curriculum falls by the wayside. But the value of this sort of thing, this 3-day project of lumberjunking, and it's Richard's thing for lumberjunking. I think credit to Richard because he wants every school to do it. So he's not going to try and monetize it like we talked about in previous episodes with ed tech companies and things. It's very much this is for the good of the kids. And you think, yeah, if we can get every school doing it, it's just a brilliant, brilliant thing. And you don't have to do it like us, but you can do it in different ways. But I'm just trying to think. We had other things, Richard, didn't we? Like we had some girls saying, we could do woodwork. And it was like, well, why did you ever think you couldn't? You can be engineer. We talk about engineers and computer scientists. There's not enough females going into engineering. And you think, but that's not something that school has done. That's something they've sort of perceived themselves from society. So things like this for all children shows them actually, I
think you're right. I think I had some lovely conversations with parents actually yesterday at the end of the day, and particularly the girls. And I would say, and Matt probably, he can tell you what he observed. But for me, in terms of output, I would say probably it was 60% girls. They probably did 60%, and the boys did about 40%. And we're always saying we want more women in engineering, we want more women in construction. Well, by the time it gets to college or university, it's too late. You want children to have the opportunity now, for girls to have the opportunity to think, actually, yes, as Matt just said, I can do this. And not only can I do this, I'm actually pretty good at it, and I like it.
But there was a year 6 girl, wasn't it, Richard, that made a set of rustic shelves took the wood, constructed it, sanded it. I didn't realise she'd made 5 sets of rustic shelves in the 3 days until we got to the sale point yesterday where they all appeared. And it was like, you've done
a lot of this really comes 360. I mean, I reference our infant school where we have an all-female teaching cohort, but our caretaker, Neil, Mr. Neil, shout out to him if he's listening at Dogsthorpe Infant, he does a woodworking club once a week, and it's both sometimes just a male role model to have a different experience, but it's also from the earliest age recognising that construction, DIY, creating, making, that maker space. It's not a gender defined space. It's everyone can engage in it. And I think the other thing that's interesting, Matt, is where this ties in is age and stage. Having had to a couple of times now step in to lead pupil referral units, alternative provision. One of the biggest challenges for young people is, well, you've given me a set of courses and qualifications to aspire to that I am going to fail in all cases. They don't play to my strengths. And yet we should be saying for those young people, this is about giving them a sense of achievement, the wins, the sense of I can do. And it doesn't necessarily matter what the qualification relates to. It's about personal development and confidence and pride. And there are a whole heap of skills that actually are really in demand and actually quite valuable jobs that play exactly down that line of using those, shall I call them traditional skills? You know, I kind of put it in the category of saying, why don't we do more of that people can say, you know what, it turns out that I'm very creative, or I'm an artist, or I'm a poet, or it doesn't matter, does it? You know, if we think about development of the child.
We've talked about soft skills as well. And I was watching them. Some of them did it on their own. Some of them did it in teams. You think, actually, teamwork, communication, critical thinking, because we can't do it like this, or this has happened, so we need to... And you're thinking, a 3-day little woodwork project, making stuff out of pallets, actually, it ticks so many boxes on such high levels for so many kids. Amazing, absolutely amazing stuff. One of the best things I've seen this year.
Can I ask what from Richard's experience in doing different schools, we talk about the young people, but what about the staff development, that sort of opening up different approaches that teachers might think about, there's a different way that I can engage? Do you see that a common theme?
Yeah, I think we see it. I only do Lumberjunkers probably 3 or 4 times a year because I've got all my other stuff to do. And, you know, there's more involved in this, all the tools, getting everything ready and so on and so on. So I only choose maybe 3, possibly 4 schools a year. But what always happens is that teachers will say, even if we're doing it for a day, I can't believe she has been able to do that. She normally doesn't do that. I can't believe he's gone off on his own and done that because normally he needs a whole load of input before doing anything. And those things are repeated, those sayings. It just gives children a chance to shine. And, you know, whether you're a child or an adult, we all want to be, you know, be the person who wins for once. And I think, you know, there's something else about these things. There's a self-esteem. So when you've got these children who are amongst their peers, and other children are looking and going, oh, that's good, you've done well. The teachers are going, wow, I'm amazed, that's incredible. And then you've got the parents then, or grandparents saying, oh, look what you've done. So it's that self-esteem. It just, you know, we all want to win for once. And I think sometimes for some children, it's a constant losing. You're never good enough. You're never good enough for this. You're never good enough for that. You never win that. You know, all those kids that I call sometimes the invisible kids, right in the middle, they never do anything wrong, but they never get any special treatment, you know, never win anything because they're just, you know, but stuff like this gives everybody a chance to win.
But the other thing is, Richard, they all enjoyed it as well.
Yeah.
And no matter how good your teachers or your school or your staff, can you say that about an English lesson, for example? I mean, if it's spag, you definitely can't and things like that. But to see 100% of children enjoying just being outdoors, lumberjunking, no restraints, use your imagination, that's pretty unique in any setting, really, isn't it? It's very powerful.
Yeah, and I think the other side of it is that it's also giving children responsibility, particularly if they're in year 6, and we're saying, you know, you're going from a primary school, which is, I guess, almost in some cases like a small family business, and then you're going up to a high school, which is like a corporate headquarters. But it'll be fine. Off you go. You know, and taking on much more responsibility in a few months' time. I mean, imagine if you were an adult and you were working for a small family business. And then actually they say, well, you've got 6 weeks off. But when you come back, I will give you like a day to look round or whatever. But when you come back, you're going to this massive corporation and all the rules are different. I mean, gosh, how would most adults cope with that?
I think we should probably say that, the kids use saws, hammers, sanding machines, drills, clamps, and not one child was harmed in the making of all the various things over 3 days, was it?
Yeah, exactly.
Consistently, we can say, Matt, when it comes to tools, technology, and other things, we underestimate the capabilities of young children. Absolutely. When they're given in a safe space. The curriculum certainly could shift back a couple of years, and many children, given the right opportunity and allowed for different children at different timelines of development, it just seems to be consistently shown time and time again now.
I mean, you and I are both in education and technology. You're definitely in technology because you're one of the leading voices. But it's been interesting that within our school, they had a storytelling festival, which you put on your LinkedIn page, which was brilliant, huge. I mean, some of the kids loved it. And then Richard does his storytelling centres, which I want you to tell us about, Richard. But actually, it's 2 examples of things that aren't tech. So it's all about balance, isn't it?
I've been sharing about Spike's Games recently, which is a board for children developing oracy and basic words. And it's just like playing a game, but it's building language and keywords in. Some of the best learning, for the right reasons, involves no technology at all. Yeah. And actually, as we become more technological in the society, and I embrace it where it's purposeful, it kind of puts more focus, like we say about put more focus on our most human skills, so soft skills being power skills. I think it puts more focus on us to embrace humanity, our most human traits. I think storytelling's just a fab example at the heart of that. But there are a lot of things about how do we develop connections and emotions? Well, normally it's because we will sit down at some point and say, I remember that story Richard told, that conversation we had. The place and space is anchored in the memory of the conversation and the topic,
So can I just go back to something like, I talk a lot about the state of Kendal. Kendal Town Centre is empty shops, and then you get a lot of trouble with the kids because there's nothing for the kids to do. Whereas in the country, we've got young farmers and things like that. And you can see that across cities and towns everywhere. A lot of children will use social media and get these bad habits using AI and Snapchat, which I don't understand still, because there's nothing else for them to do. Whereas there's things like your storytelling centres, Richard, and you've opened another one in Durham. That is a positive vehicle for kids somewhere to go, something to do. And actually, should you be seeing it in every town and several in every city? Or actually, these kids that have got nothing better to do in the free time, instead of going off and sitting on Snapchat while they're Snapchatting the person next to them, they could go and learn a bit more about storytelling and all these massive, important skills as part of it.
Yeah. I think the other thing is as well, again, we talked about girls and construction and into sort of STEM subjects. But we talk about the creative and cultural sectors being one of our biggest earners for this country, which is brilliant, fantastic. So if it is, why aren't we spending more time helping our children be equipped for it if that's what they want to do? So again, it's no good having your college courses full of it or university courses full of it if we don't have those kids interested in it for an early age, because the pipeline then is broken. So we've got some good stuff that happens in primary schools, but it's not really that focused. Yeah. And then there's no pipeline. But when you get to sort of 16 and you look at the college courses that are available, amazing. Look at the university courses available, amazing. But how would you know that you would be interested in it? You would be any good at it? That kind of stuff. So if we want more kids from working class and other backgrounds going into those kind of things, we have to show them it in school, that it's a possibility. Yeah. Not that they will ultimately do it, but it's a possibility.
Mm-hmm. We've come full circle to those old things that I talked about in a few episodes, Matt. We've got the top of the tree. We've got this international measure of successful education, PISA rankings, OECD, looking at those 15-year-olds, very STEM focused, very EBAC focused in terms of the buckets. And then we have a UK education system where actually over the last 20 years, we've narrowed more and more into the EBAC buckets. We've said, you need to do English, maths, science, a language, and then you can squeeze something else in, history or geography, and fill the thing. yes, of course we support arts in our school, but actually we don't really, because we don't allow enough time to do them. And so actually the curriculum has meant that when children arrive at that breadth of choices when it comes to college and university, they've got no grounding. We're back in the Donald Rumsfeld. It's not the known knowns or known unknowns. It's the unknown unknowns. And I've argued good evidence. You see a lot of children after their GCSEs, they pick sociology, psychology, other subjects because they just want to do something different away from those standard buckets. But how many of the different courses, the different career pathways you take will involve your ability to articulate effectively, either for purpose or for intent, to shape a conversation, to sell something, to engage in something, to put a bid for support because you've got an innovative idea and you want to take it forward. And if you ground it, I'm going to say, going off on a bit of a thing, the big growth area, problem-based, project-based learning, well, isn't actually developing communication skills to articulate and think through how you move forward actually at the heart of that?
See, I think there's two types of people, isn't there? There's the type of person like Matt who says, well, actually, I don't know how to do this storytelling stuff or this stuff, whatever, so I'll get somebody in to teach us and help us with it. I'm good at doing the head teacher stuff, but I'm clever enough to actually...
I don't know anything, Richard.
I'm clever enough to know what I don't know, right? Yeah? And then there are some people who think that they just kind of know it all. And I'll give you an example of the first one. So I get a phone call, an email first, actually, from a person who says, I believe that you do a lot of storytelling and so on and so on. I watched you on LinkedIn and stuff like that. I'm going to Dragon's Den to do a pitch for quite a lot of money. Could I do some work with you so I'm ready for the pitch? Now, this particular person, the business, I loved it. I wanted to buy something that they were producing, right? So they were fantastic, but they knew they were a brilliant business person, but they thought, why not get some extra help? And happy ending to the story, they did get their funding at Dragon's Den. But it's that kind of thing, and I'm very fortunate. I work with people I'm a professor in practice at Durham University currently in the humanities department. Again, soft skills, not soft skills, very much in demand skills. So, they know, and lots of people know that they think, yeah, okay, let's get some help on that. Just as you would to get help on any other thing. I think storytelling, some people believe that they can do it really well, and some people can. But, it's like any other form of art, craft, or skill. If it was pottery, you wouldn't immediately think because you'd drunk a few cups of coffee, you could actually get on the old pottery wheel and knock a few out. It is a very, very interesting, as a very involved skill. They call me sometimes a master storyteller, but actually I would say I'm a mastering storyteller. I'm still trying to master it professionally 21 years in. You never want to get to that stage where you think you know it all, because you don't.
I love that. Although, thank you for sharing that, because I think that really puts that thing on. We often dismiss the value of things we think we can do, and that's the key, isn't it? The difference between we can do it and we can do it well. But you just slipped into that conversation about another role, a visiting professor in Durham or whatever. I'm just really interested. Can we segue for a minute, Matt, about how that ties in with the humanities and other topics that you share?
And you're like, wow.
I often refer to myself as a man with many hats, but I kind of feel like I'm out-hatted today, Richard, so I'm really interested.
Well, I've always said, people ask you to do stuff and you say yes. I always say, if it looks interesting, I always say yes. And I'd done some work with one of the colleges, because Durham University is collegiate. So I'd done some work with one of the colleges, came into contact with some other people, and they said, can would you be interested? And I said, I'd absolutely. As a kid who come from that area and come from a very different background and would look at the university and not even know what a university was really. I knew it was something where clever people were, but I didn't know what it actually was. So that's been fascinating working with them for the last 6 months. And then people saying, somebody in the music department, could you come in and talk about some of the work that you do with musicians on lyrics? and how that ties into literacy and what have you. Yeah, brilliant. And then somebody else says, can you come in and talk to us about creative writing from your perspective? And absolutely, yes. And then just last Friday, it was a group of PhD students who, from 5 Northeast unis and 2 Northern Ireland ones, they had their summer camp, and a whole week their focus was on story. So I actually did the Friday, the last day, for like about an hour and so storytelling. And it was really interesting because I had put a PowerPoint up and they thought they were getting a PowerPoint. They weren't actually, because what I did was I just actually pretended, first of all, that my PowerPoint wasn't working. I wanted to see how much empathy was in the room, because storytelling engenders empathy. It really does. It creates all kinds of chemicals and stuff as well. But there was only one slide on the PowerPoint when I eventually got it working, which was I'm not going to use a PowerPoint. I'm going to use your imagination instead, because it's like radio. There are better pictures on radio, they used to say. And that's another thing. If we want to move forwards with all of this amazing tech we've got, the tech will just sit there. It's our imagination that drives it. I said AI is the new steam. Steam power just changed the world incredibly. Yes, some people lost their jobs, but that happens every time. But the things it created, things of beauty, things of improvements, so many things. It made a lot of things safer. I've got a family history on one side of my family as coal miners, but steam-powered engines actually made the mines safer. So, we should look at AI and think it's the new steam. And what can our imaginations create from it or with it? And that's my perspective.
Can I just go off on a bit of a tangent linked to this, Richard? Like, if you've got kids in a school, if they're not happy and healthily, especially mentally, then nothing's going to work well learning and teaching in terms of that. But I think it's the same with adults. Al, you're going to struggle to do your job well if you're in a bad place mentally. But Richard, a while ago, years and years ago, you started a little local mental health support group, and then that grew a bit. Do you want to just share a bit about what that became?
Well, I was interested in my own health. I think I'd just gone past 30, I think. And I was interested in my own health. I'd gone to the GP with an issue and got it resolved anyway. But there was no support. I'm a big reader. I like to find things out, and that's prior to the internet, really. And there was no information, so I went to the health authority, the little office in the town, and I said, "Have you got anything on men's health?" And they said, "Oh, hang on a minute, I think so." They opened this filing cabinet, the filing cabinet drawers, and they pulled out this piece of paper. It was like an A4 folded in half, very badly printed. It looked like it'd been through an old-fashioned duplicator or something. And I said, "All right, thanks." And I was just about to go, and they said, "Oh no, you can't take it. That's the only one we've got." I said, "What? That's all you've got on men's health in the health department?" I said, "Yeah." So I thought, right, I've got to change this. And that was another thing I think that I grew up with. This kind of, if there's something that needs doing in my family, don't wait for somebody else to do it. If something on the floor needs picking up, pick it up. If something needs fixing, if the horse needs feeding, if a wheel needs changing, you've seen it, you do it. So I thought, well, I've got to do something. So I started a campaign for a men's health week. Did a little local one, then did a regional one. And then it took me 2 years, because I had no idea what I was doing. It took me 2 years backwards and forwards to London at my own expense. And then getting a National Men's Health Week off the ground. So in 2002, we managed to launch National Men's Health Week, and it's still going now. I was the trustee of the charity set up to run it, but I was also the director of the week for the first 2 years. We went from 250 projects in the first year, 6,000 in the second year. And I didn't want it to be a job. That was before the internet as well. That was word of mouth. That was getting stuff out via email, and newspapers and what have you. People used to read more newspapers then. But the thing is, if not you, then who? If not now, then when? And I think that's another thing we've tried to get across to our children. It's no good me standing and going, "Oh, I did blah, 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 blah." But you have to show them that, look, you can be the one. You can be the one to change this. You can be the one to do this. And I think anybody can do anything within reason. And talking of that, we had some lovely visitors come along to Crosthwaite on Thursday.
Yes, brilliant, wasn't it?
Who had come up from Birmingham, a head teacher and one of her staff, and 2 children from a special school.
2 gorgeous children,
and
yeah.
Just incredible. These children just turned up with their teachers. Kids are everywhere with tools and all kinds of stuff going on. And those Crosthwaite children just welcomed.
They're just
those
brilliant.
Children,
kids are just brilliant, aren't they?
As if they were there every day. And again, the children come in, we say hello, and we show them what we're doing, and we try to find out, do you like wheels? Do you like this? Do you like that? And then within 10 minutes, we've got one of the girls, she's using the little electric screwdriver to put wheels on a car.
I've had feedback from the head, Richard, and the girls, both girls, in very different ways. It's one of the best things they've done in a couple of years, but it's because the kids at Crosthwaite just took them and just went off with them. And they don't have the, I don't know what's the word, prejudices or the worries maybe that grown-ups do. Kids are just awesome. Can we put kids in charge? Can we make kids the government? Because I've got a funny feeling that things would run a lot more smoothly if we did.
They would, and I think the thing that I've over the last 21 years working in schools, and prior to that, working in youth clubs, children have taught me way more, I think, than I've taught them ever. Just the way they've made me a better communicator. They speak from the heart. They're kind. They're generous. And when you adopt that sometimes with adults, they say, why are you doing this for me? Oh, you've done so much for me, but I haven't done anything for you. And you don't get that with children.
Yeah.
There's just this, they give. And I think, they say what's on their mind. And I think children, as you've just said, I think if children take the lead on a lot of things, they will make us as adults better at doing things.
Can I ask your thoughts on something? Because, Al knows my thoughts on mainstream education and the curriculum and the accountability measures got in place, which are very restrictive and constrict what you can do and restrict what you can do, whatever. I'm watching online and hybrid schooling become more and more common. Fully online, I can see how it might meet some needs, but I just have concerns about the social aspect. But hybrid schools, to me, are the absolute future of education. So actually, you have bases around the country, that kids can go to do a lumberjunking week, for example. And then the rest of the time it's child-led. But what's your perception of that?
Well, I've seen it going back 30 years. That if you look at the showman communities, people who travel around and travel around most of the summer, they have always done that hybrid where they have gone to school in the winter, and if they're travelling through the season, they've actually kept in touch with a work pack the teacher gave them. Now, of course, since the advent of technology, they're zooming into some of the lessons. So they're doing their family business, but they're also doing that. Why can't I know lots of people who are self-employed, lots of people who work for organisations. They could take their kids with them when they travel. They could take their kids with them, give them that experience, but also
what an experience.
They could zoom back into school, and then we have these meetups, so you can have people meeting up. So nomadic communities have been using this hybrid method for the last 30 years. And with technology, even more so. They used to have these little kind of like blue book, red book things that they used to put it in a pack. And then the next teacher in the next school would go, oh, yeah, you did that. Right. OK, we'll get you on with that.
And make it digital. So easy.
And now it's digital, How cool is
that? And yet our current system, if a parent comes to me and says, I'd like to take my kids to Costa Rica for a month in term time, I have no facility to approve that. It's an unauthorised absence. When the council finds out, you're going to get fined however many £1,000. But actually, 4 weeks in Costa Rica, that's an amazing experience. Yeah. I can't say go for it. I do, unofficially, but officially, no.
I think if you had kids that were ball boys at Wimbledon, you might be able to do it.
Yeah, well, so there's definitely,
there's so much there to unpick. But it's interesting. It all comes back full round to humans, experience, those core skills, And that Costa Rica trip is about how you share those adventures, how you make it a learning opportunity, and that's the interesting thing. Matt, I'm really, really conscious of time. Richard, yeah. I'm shocked having you on that we've gone over time and we've been doing lots of talking and storytelling, as if that would happen. I suspect we might have to have you back for an episode 2 and 3.
What's the possibilities?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Matt, would you like to pick up any closing thoughts, questions?
No. What's the Room 101 thing we do sometimes, Al? 3 things you would bin in education. If you were put on the spot now, Richard, 3 things you would get shut off. Room 101.
Paperwork that nobody ever sees.
Oh, there's a lot of that.
Loads and loads of data that nobody ever sees.
Yeah.
Pointless. If nobody ever sees it, what's the point? Why don't you just keep a running tally as you go and then tell somebody what's happening? Rigidity. It's so rigid. You have to do this, and we train our teachers and our head teachers, who are some of the most cleverest, brilliant people in the world. Then we say a big list of things you can't do. So it is, yeah. And the other thing I would say, ban useless tech. Right? And then people say, you gave your grandson when he was 4 an axe to chop wood. And I say, yeah, because I taught him how to do it safely. He's wearing gloves and so on and so on. And I say, but you're pushing your child around town and they've got an iPad in front of them. And your child is in their bedroom watching with access to the internet. And which is safer.
Yeah, brilliant.
Matt, I'm going to end that one on a quote that I heard very recently, a Simon Sinek quote about 2 men who go into the wood every day to chop trees. And one of them carries on all throughout the day, and the other one stops at lunchtime and disappears for an hour and then comes back. And at the end of the week, he's chopped loads more wood. And the lumberjack or the wood chopper asked the other one, how is it you take an hour off for lunch every day and yet you still chop more wood than me? And he said, well, that's easy. I just go home each day to sharpen my axe. And I think that kind of really resonates with a lot of these things here. It's about actually how we use our tools, including our voices, with purpose.
I thought he was sneaking off to use a chainsaw, so that's where my thinking is.
Well, yeah, but there you go. I'm going to say, not claiming ownership of that one, but I think it just resonates sometimes on the most simple bit. I've really enjoyed this, Richard. Thank you so much for joining us for a chat. Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.